Ever feel like you're just wading through tons of information, but not really grasping the core stuff? Like you want that real aha moment.
Hmm.
Well, that's what we try to do here. Today, we're going to dive deep into something that's literally all around you, even if you don't always notice it, the fundamental principles of design.
Exactly. Yeah, we looked at quite a bit of material, and what's really cool is how these main ideas, balance, proportion, rhythm, emphasis, and harmony,
Yeah.
they're not just like lofty theories.
Right.
They're the actual tools people use when they're making anything visual.
Mm-hmm.
Could be a website, could be um, a piece of clothing. Think of this as your shortcut to figuring out why some designs just feel right.
Yeah, why they just work. So, our mission today is to really unpack these five principles, not just give you definitions, but show you how they actually function out there and, why they matter so much.
Hmm.
Ready to jump in? Let's start with maybe the most foundational one, balance.
Okay, balance. So when we talk about balance in design, maybe picture like a seesaw,
Mm.
you know?
It's all about visual equilibrium, getting that feeling of stability where no single part feels like it's going to tip the whole thing over or just dominate everything else.
So it feels steady, comfortable to look at.
Yeah, the sources we looked at really stress that. When a design is balanced, your eye can just move around it easily. It feels settled.
And it's not always about making both sides identical, is it?
Yeah.
There are different flavors of balance.
Definitely not. There are a few key ways to get there.
Let's start with the one that seems, I guess, the most obvious, symmetrical balance.
Right? Symmetrical, or sometimes called formal balance. It's essentially a mirror image. Imagine like drawing a line right down the middle, vertically or horizontally.
Uh-huh.
And the stuff on one side pretty much matches the stuff on the other side.
Mhm.
In terms of like visual weight and how it's arranged, the human body is a pretty good natural example, right?
Yeah, roughly symmetrical.
Roughly, yeah. And what's interesting is that while symmetrical designs often feel really dignified, solid, stable,
Hmm.
they can sometimes feel a little bit static,
Yeah.
maybe less exciting. Like a very formal portrait, maybe. Everything perfectly centered, grounded, but maybe not super dynamic.
Exactly. Which brings us to the other side of the coin.
Mm?
Asymmetrical balance. That one always seems a bit more intriguing.
Yeah, I agree. It feels more active.
It really does. Asymmetrical balance or informal balance is where you get that same feeling of stability, that equilibrium,
Mm-hmm.
but the things on either side of that imaginary line are actually different.
Mm-hmm.
This is often way more complex to achieve because it really hinges on this idea of visual weight.
Okay, visual weight. That's not just about physical size, is it? I remember reading that. Like, a tiny spot of super bright color can feel heavier visually than a big pale shade.
Exactly. Yeah, the material we looked at breaks this down really well.
Uh-huh.
Think about color. A small zone of really intense, vibrant color
Mhm.
is going to grab your eye way more than a bigger, quieter, neutral area.
Okay.
Then there's value,
Yeah.
the contrast between light and dark.
Mhm.
High contrast just packs more visual punch. Shape is another one. A complex, fiddly little shape can balance out a much larger, simpler area. Even
Right.
just where you put something affects its weight. Like an element pushed off to the side can balance something bigger near the center.
Huh.
And texture, this one's interesting. A small patch of really rough or intricate texture can totally hold its own against a big, smooth area. Like, think of a fuzzy cuff on a plain jacket sleeve. Your eye goes right to the texture.
Yeah, I see that.
And even eye direction, like if lines or shapes point your gaze somewhere, that directionality adds to the balance equation. It's like all these different factors are in this constant negotiation, this visual balancing act.
It really is like juggling. Okay, what about the third type? Radial balance. That makes me think of like ripples in a pond or spokes on a wheel.
Perfect examples. Radial balance is exactly that.
Yeah.
Elements arranged so they radiate outwards from a central point,
Mhm.
like spokes on a wheel or maybe petals on a flower. This setup naturally just pulls your eye right into that center point. Think of mandala designs or pleats on a skirt spreading out from the waistband. It gives a really strong focus and a sense of outward energy.
Okay, so balance gives us that stability. Let's move on. How do the sizes of things relate to each other? That's proportion, right?
Yeah, proportion. This is all about the relationship of sizes, how big or small different parts of a design are compared to each other and compared to the whole thing.
Okay.
And our sources really hammer home how vital this is, not just in art or architecture, but especially in things like textiles and clothing, because you're almost always seeing those designs in relation to the human body.
Right, it has to look right on someone.
Exactly. It's about finding those size relationships, those scales that just feel harmonious. like they belong together.
And this is where that famous, almost mystical golden mean comes in, the golden ratio. It always sounds so
Uh,
calculated.
It sounds it, but it's actually rooted in maths.
Yeah.
The golden mean or golden ratio is approximately 1 to 1.618.
Yeah.
And what's wild is how often this ratio shows up in nature, like the spirals in seashells, the way trees branch out, even the proportions of, well, the human form itself.
Wow.
So the idea is that when designers use this ratio maybe visually, using something called the golden spiral, it tends to create compositions that people just find inherently pleasing. It's like our eyes, our brains are sort of pre-wired to appreciate it.
It's kind of amazing that a math thing can have such a big aesthetic effect. Okay, moving on. Let's talk rhythm. This always makes me think of music, like a beat. Is it similar in design?
That's a great way to think about it, yeah. Rhythm in design is basically the patterned repetition, the recurrence, the organized movement of different design elements.
Okay.
Just like a beat guides your ear through a song, visual rhythm guides your eye through a composition. Our sources explained you can get this rhythm by repeating things or through like a gradual change progression in elements or through that radiation we just talked about. Even just changing colors in a pattern or how you use empty space. That creates rhythm too. And what's important is that rhythm doesn't just look good. It actually helps to reinforce the structure or function of a design.
Yeah.
It makes it easier for you, the viewer, to kind of understand what's going on.
So how do designers actually create that visual beat? What are the main techniques?
Well, the material points to three main ways. First up is just repetition. Using the same element or very similar ones over and over.
Simple enough.
Yeah, creates unity, consistency. But repetition itself has variations. You can have regular repetition, same elements, same spacing. Like identical buttons lined up perfectly.
Okay, very orderly.
Very orderly. But sometimes, that can get a bit boring if there's no variation at all.
Yeah.
You can make it more interesting just by changing the spacing, though.
Right.
Then there's irregular repetition. This is where the elements might vary or the spaces between them, or both. It creates a more random, maybe more dynamic rhythm. Think of like different sized polka dots scattered across fabric.
Yeah, less predictable. Okay, that makes sense. What's the second method for rhythm?
Second one is gradation. This is about a gradual change in some aspect of the design elements. Maybe a line gets progressively thicker, or shapes get slowly bigger or smaller, or the space between them changes gradually, or even a color slowly shifts in intensity or value. What's key here is that it's a smooth, ordered change, unlike contrast, which is all about sharp, sudden differences.
So it's more of a flow.
Exactly. Like if you make shapes get smaller as they go back, that gradation creates a sense of perspective, like they're receding in space. Or shifting from light to dark can make something look rounded, give it volume.
A subtle way to guide the eye and suggest movement or depth. Okay.
And the third way, radiation again.
Yeah, radiation pops up again here under rhythm. It's that same idea.
Yeah.
Elements spreading out from a central point. It creates a very clear outward flow, guiding the eye outwards.
But, as we touched on with balance, the sources do mention being careful with radiation in clothing. Those radiating lines can really affect how you perceive shape. They might make an area look bigger or smaller, depending on where they are and how they spread.
Good point.
But it can be really effective in, say, drape designs, where the fabric naturally falls in radiating folds.
Okay, so rhythm gives us flow and movement. Now, how do we make one specific thing really jump out and grab attention? It's emphasis, right?
That's emphasis, exactly. It's the strategy you use to make one particular part of the design stand out, to make it the focal point.
The star of the show.
Pretty much. Our sources point out that while rhythm might lead your eye on a journey around the design, emphasis is what makes your eye stop and really look at something specific. And you can create it through placement, like where you put it, or by using things like asymmetrical balance to draw attention, and maybe most powerfully, through contrast.
Okay. And within emphasis, I remember reading about dominance and subordination. Sounds a bit like creating a visual pecking order.
That's a great way to put it. Dominance is about making one element, or maybe a small group of elements, clearly more noticeable than everything else around it. So that becomes the main thing you see, the focal point. And other parts of the design kind of support it or play second fiddle. Think about a jacket with like a really bold, unusual pocket detail, or a dress that's all one color except for one bright contrasting belt. That's the dominant feature.
Okay.
And the sources mentioned that things like really sharp lines or shiny textures or bright, intense colors, those tend to naturally dominate visually.
So if one thing is dominant, the other things need to be less so. That's subordination.
Exactly. Subordination is basically toning down the other elements so they don't compete with the main focal point. You need that quiet background for the star to really shine.
Right.
Though you can also have subtle emphasis, kind of leading the eye to secondary points of interest after the main one. It creates more depth.
Makes sense. So how do designers actually do this? Create emphasis. You mentioned placement and contrast. What's the third way?
Okay, yeah, 3 main tactics highlighted in the material. We've touched on contrast quite a bit, using difference to make something stand out. Difference in color, like black and white. Difference in shape, difference in texture, difference in size, difference in tone, even direction of lines. It breaks up monotony and highlights what's important. The classic example often given is that Yves Saint Laurent Mondrian dress.
Oh, yeah. With the black lines and the color blocks, very clear emphasis.
Totally. The contrast does all the work there. But you do have to be careful not to have too much contrast scattered everywhere, or it just becomes confusing.
Right, loses focus. Okay, so contrast, then placement.
Placement, yeah. Generally, things placed near the center of a design tend to get noticed first. Things out near the edges, less so.
Okay.
So just where you put a detail on, say, a shirt or pocket, some embroidery, that position hugely affects how much emphasis it gets. And related to placement are things like proximity grouping elements close together makes them read as one unit, and similarity, grouping things that share a color or texture.
So grouping things can create emphasis too. What was the third method?
The third one is isolation.
Isolation, like setting something off on its own?
Precisely. You take an element or detail and you physically separate it from everything else around it. Put some empty space around it. Because it's not visually blending in or touching other things, it just naturally draws your eye. Like putting one word in bold in a whole paragraph of normal text, it stands out because it's alone.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Right, we've covered balance, proportion, rhythm, emphasis. That leaves our fifth core principle, harmony. What's the essence of harmony?
Harmony is really about achieving that overall sense of visual satisfaction. It's the feeling you get when different elements, even if they are contrasting, are combined in a way that feels right, like they belong together.
Okay.
Our sources explain it as a kind of visual agreement. It often happens when you repeat one or more design qualities, like a particular shape or texture or color, throughout the design. It creates consistency.
So it's about unity, but maybe more subtle than just pure repetition.
Yeah, it's about coherence. You can get harmony using colors that are neighbors on the color wheel, for instance. They naturally relate. But interestingly, you can also achieve harmony with contrasting elements, like opposite colors, if you introduce something that bridges the gap. The example given was using brown, kind of neutral, to harmonize brighter red and green elements.
Oh, interesting. Like a mediator.
Kind of. And sharing those characteristics we mentioned, shape, texture, color, across different parts is really key. Like in clothing, if the main shape of a garment is curvy, using curved pockets and a curved collar shape reinforces that and creates harmony. Angular shapes work better with other angular shapes.
It makes sense visually, like everything is speaking the same design language.
Exactly. And when you're talking specifically about garments, the material really stressed bringing together the function, the structure, and the decoration harmoniously. That means thinking about the whole context. Who's wearing it, their age, their coloring, their lifestyle, even the season. It's about making sure all those aspects work together as a cohesive whole.
Right, it all has to fit together.
Yeah, there was a good example of like a simple gray jacket and skirt suit,
Yeah.
but paired with a quite bold black and white houndstooth pattern overcoat.
Okay.
The harmony comes from the shared neutral colors, gray, black, white, even though the patterns are different. And then maybe accessories, like a bag or shoes, would echo those colors, or the feeling tying it all together.
Ah, I see. Creating links between the different pieces. Okay, so let's quickly recap. We've journeyed through balance, that visual stability,
Equilibrium.
proportion, how sizes relate to each
Yeah,
other,
KO.
rhythm, the flow and movement that guides the eye,
A visual beat.
emphasis, making sure the important stuff stands out,
The focal point.
and finally, harmony, that sense of everything working together, feeling unified and pleasing.
Exactly. And I think the biggest takeaway from digging into all this is that these 5 principles, they're not separate boxes. They're totally interconnected.
Yeah.
They overlap. They influence each other constantly. You use balance to help create emphasis. Rhythm helps create harmony. Proportion affects balance. It's all intertwined in making designs that, work,
Mm.
whether it's fashion or graphic design or anything visual.
So for you listening, here's something to chew on. As you go about your day now, maybe start actively looking for these principles. Notice them.
Mm.
In buildings, in nature, think about that golden ratio in art, absolutely, but even just in the clothes people are wearing or the layout of a magazine page.
Hmm.
Ask yourself, how is balance working here? Does the proportion feel right? Where does the rhythm lead my eye? What's being emphasized? Does it all feel harmonious?
Yeah, seeing it in action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because understanding these principles isn't just like academic knowledge for designers. It can genuinely give you a deeper appreciation for why things look the way they do, for the sort of intention behind the visuals all around us, and maybe it even helps you think more visually yourself. What sort of things are jumping out at you now, having thought about these principles maybe a bit more consciously?